The shuttle doesn't land where the crowds gather. You are 11 years old. You live in a hive city, 100 million bodies pressed into concrete and rust. And the recruiters didn't come to the spires. They came to the underhive. They came for you. You've been chosen. That is the last easy thing that will ever happen to you. Here is what nobody tells you, not in the streets, not in the propaganda casts, not in the litanies you've heard since before you could read them. In-universe records suggest that for every formal intake processed by a chapter like the Ultramarines, fewer than 1 in 100 aspirants survives to take the field. One surviving battle brother from every 100 boys who began. The chapter's historical records point to ratios that run darker still. One account describes an intake of 300 individuals producing a single survivor, a boy who would grow to become among the Ultramarines' most celebrated commanders. That isn't considered exceptional. That is considered lucky. The comparison most people reach for is the battlefield. Heresy-era battles, named engagements with casualty counts that still define the upper limit of military catastrophe in a 10,000-year war. The word-bearers killed more than half the Ultramarines deployed at Calth. The drop site massacre at Isstvan 5 shattered 3 loyalist legions in what the records attribute to Malcador the Sigillite as 3 bloody hours. Those engagements were catastrophic. Recruitment, measured across all documented intakes, claims proportionally more lives than almost any single named engagement in the heresy. Not in absolute numbers, because heresy-era legions were enormous, and chapters are capped at 1,000. In survival rate, year over year, generation over generation. The siege of Terra is in a separate category entirely. Isstvan 5, where 8 traitor legions obliterated 3 loyalist ones, approaches the comparison. Everything else falls short of what the chapter Apothecary does to children with a surgical kit and 19 engineered organs. This is a clinical account. There are 47 distinct ways you die before you ever carry a bolter into a live engagement. Here are all of them. You don't begin as a neophyte. You begin as an aspirant, which means you've passed genetic tissue screening and been assessed as potentially compatible with the chapter's gene seed. This is the easiest test in the sequence, and it still eliminates most candidates before the process starts. Now come the trials. Every chapter runs them differently. Some leave aspirants in desert conditions without water for 4 days. Some drop them into hive subzones stripped of everything except their own capacity for violence. Some use the challenge duel, an aspirant, unarmed, against a fully awake, deliberately restrained space marine.
Canonical records note with economy that most challenge duels end in the aspirant's death. The Astartes isn't armored. He isn't armed. He stands 2.5 meters tall, weighs over 300 kilograms, and the point of the duel isn't that you win. It's an assessment of how you die. Specifically, whether you die moving forward. You survive the trials. You survive because you are exactly what they're selecting for. Aggressive, physically capable, with what the Index Astartes describes without irony as a psychotic-level killer instinct. Whole gangs from the underhive are sometimes captured for this. The Lexicanum confirms it. Chapters prefer volunteers, but the preferred method is acquiring the best candidates regardless of consent. Some boys who fail the trials are redirected to chapter serf status. Bondsmen who maintain equipment, cruise ships, serve the chapter from a humble distance. Some fail by dying in the trials themselves. The outcome depends on which trial type claimed you and how much value the chapter places on your continued existence in some form. You don't wash out. This is the problem. You are now a neophyte. You are in a surgical room.
The apothecary begins. The secondary heart is first, phase 1 of 19. A second heart, surgically grafted to your circulatory system. The lexicanum calls it the simplest and most self-sufficient of the 19 organs. Without it, none of the subsequent implants are survivable. It provides backup circulation, boosts blood flow under trauma, keeps you functioning when damage would otherwise be terminal. If the surgery fails, or if your body rejects the implant during the integration window, the result is cardiac complication during a period when you are also undergoing significant physiological change. The apothecary's hands are precise. The process does not reward imprecision. Death 1. Surgical failure during secondary heart implantation.
Death 2. Cardiac rejection during integration. The osmodula and biscopia are phases 2 and 3. They work as a tandem because the hemastamen, which will regulate them both, comes later. This isn't reassuring. The osmodula sits near the pituitary gland and begins secreting an engineered growth hormone. Combined with a diet laced with microscopic, ceramic-based minerals, compounds no child has any biological reason to be consuming, it drives your skeleton to restructure. Canonical description confirms the timeline. 2 years after implantation, your bones are larger and exponentially stronger than any baseline human males. The rib cage fuses, not into a flexible structure anymore, into a solid, bulletproof mass of interlocked bone plates. The biscopia drives muscle growth to match the expanding skeleton. Small, circular, implanted in the chest cavity, releasing hormones. You grow. If the osmodula loses calibration before the hemastamen comes online, bone growth becomes pathological. Overgrowth. Structural failure in the forming plates. Malformed calcium deposits from insufficient ceramic intake. The rib fusion that should create an armor-plated chest cavity instead compresses the lungs within. If the biscopia works and the osmodula doesn't, you're building muscle against a skeleton that hasn't properly hardened. The forces involved are significant. Death 3. Bone growth pathology during osmodula remodeling. Death 4. Insufficient ceramic intake creating malformed skeletal structure. Death 5. Rib fusion failure. Incomplete plate formation compressing lung capacity. Death 6. Biscopia-driven muscle growth overwhelming skeletal support before bone integration completes. 18 months into this, you weigh 40% more than you did at the shuttle.
You are in the worst possible state, half transformed, the changes enormous, the regulation not yet installed. The hemastamen is phase 4, implanted into the main circulatory system. It increases the hemoglobin efficiency of your blood, oxygenating you at a level no baseline human can reach. More critically, it begins monitoring and controlling the osmodula and biscopia, the feedback loop for systems that were already running. If it rejects, no blood chemistry correction, no regulation of the bone and muscle growth already in progress. The cascade from a failed hemastamen moves forward and backward through everything that's already been implanted. Death 7. Hemastamen rejection cascading into phase 2 and 3 failure. Death 8. Blood chemistry dysregulation creating hemolysis or oxygen toxicity. Laraman's organ arrives next, liver-shaped, golf ball-sized, placed in the chest cavity, connected to the circulatory system.
It generates Laraman cells that flood to any wound site on contact with air and form near-instant scar tissue. Without this organ, bleeding out is the primary kill vector for the rest of the process. When Laraman's organ fails, it fails in 2 directions. A non-functional organ leaves you without clotting as subsequent surgeries proceed. An incorrectly integrated organ activates without a wound. The Laraman cells treating functional blood vessels as sites to be sealed. Death 9. Laraman cells triggering internal clotting in functional circulatory pathways. Death 10. Laraman's organ failure leaving you without clotting during subsequent implantation surgeries. The catalepsian node is phase 6, implanted at the back of the brain. Pea-sized. It modifies your circadian rhythm, your hormonal response to fatigue, your fundamental relationship with sleep. A working node allows you to switch off regions of the brain sequentially, remaining perceptually awake and functionally alert while resting specific cognitive processes. The canonical record for continuous operation without full sleep with an integrated node is 328 hours, 13 days. The failure case is documented at chapter level, not just individual level. The Doom Warriors chapter carries a defect in their catalepsian nodes. The nodes never properly shut off, locking every Marine in that chapter into a state where normal sleep is structurally impossible. Their records describe what happens to a transhuman body when this implant fails to function correctly. The body sustains. The mind does not keep pace indefinitely. At the aspirant level, the failure modes are simpler and more lethal. A node that activates before proper integration disrupts hormonal sleep regulation before the body is prepared to compensate.
A node that fails to integrate leaves you biologically dependent on a sleep architecture that is simultaneously being modified by everything else happening inside you. The stress hormone cascade from sustained sleep disruption in a developing nervous system undergoing surgical modification at multiple points simultaneously creates cardiac loading. Death 11. Catalepsian node failing to integrate, creating sleep deprivation pathology. Death 12. Premature node activation disrupting hormonal regulation during bone and muscle integration. Death 13. Stress hormone cascade from node failure creating cardiac event. Phases 7, 8, and 9, the pre-omnor, the omophagia, and the multi-lung, are often administered simultaneously when your body's integration progress permits. If you find that concerning, the concern is appropriate. The pre-omnor is a pre-stomach. It sits before your natural stomach in the digestive sequence and acts as a decontamination chamber, neutralizing toxins before they reach your actual digestive organs. Eventually, you will be able to consume things that would kill a baseline human by the third bite. You aren't there yet because the preomnor must fully integrate before it provides any protection, and partial integration is in some ways worse than none. Inconsistent filtration, unpredictable bypass routes. Death 14. Failed preomnor integration leaving the digestive system unprotected through subsequent phases. Death 15. Partial integration creating toxin pathways around the decontamination chamber. The omophagia is phase 8, and it's also called the remembrancer. Canonical description: implanted into the spinal cord, with 4 nerve bundles connecting the spine to the stomach wall. While it sits in the spinal cord, it's functionally part of the brain. It reads genetic material from consumed flesh, DNA, RNA, protein sequences related to experience and memory, and transmits that information to the cerebral cortex as direct experience. You eat the flesh of a creature and receive fragments of what that creature knew. Whole chapters have built ritual and identity around this organ. The blood drinkers, the flesh tearers, The homophagia is why. During integration, 4 nerve bundles are being woven into an existing spinal cord. The spinal cord is your body's primary information pathway. What you are doing is adding new channels to that pathway while everything is in simultaneous use. The blood angel's gene seed expresses an overactive homophagia. Their records describe it producing uncontrolled cravings and flooding consciousness with sensory data from consumed material. That is what a mutation amplifying the organ does. In an aspirant whose integration is failing rather than succeeding, the nerve bundles misfire.
The organ doesn't cleanly transmit. It floods. Memory without origin. Sensation without source. 4 incorrectly integrated nerve bundles connecting a digestive organ to a brain that is also simultaneously being modified by 17 other ongoing processes. Death 16. Spinal cord damage during homophagia nerve bundle implantation. Death 17. Homophagia integration failure causing uncontrolled sensory cascade. Death 18. Combined catalepsian node and homophagia complications. Overlapping neurological failure. The multilung is the third lung, activated when a sphincter closes your primary two and shifts breathing operations entirely to the implant. Incorrect function, survival in low oxygen environments, toxic atmospheres, briefly in water. If the sphincter fires and the multilung isn't integrated to take over, you have no functional breathing apparatus.
If the sphincter fails and the multilung activates simultaneously, the pressure differentials between 3 active respiratory systems aren't compatible with continued function. Death 19. Multilung rejection with sphincter activation. Primary lungs sealed. No replacement function. Death 20. Sphincter failure with simultaneous multilung activation, creating pulmonary interference. Death 21. Multilung rejection while preomnor pressure changes have already altered the chest cavity geometry. You are somewhere between 14 and 16. What remains modifies your senses, your capacity to survive wounds, your relationship with radiation, and the structure of how you process existence. The oculobe sits at the base of the brain and drives hormonal stimulation that enables apothecaries to adjust your optic nerve and retinal cell growth patterns, the result being superhuman vision, low light capacity, target resolution at multi-kilometer range. The oculobe enables those adjustments. It doesn't perform them directly. A failed oculobe means the adjustments can't be safely made, while the hormonal stimulation of optic tissue continues without guidance. Death 22. Oculobe rejection with unregulated continued optic stimulation. Death 23. Oculobe integration failure causing optic nerve damage during adjustment window. Lyman's ear replaces your inner ear entirely, not augments. The canonical language is precise. The implant completely replaces a Marine's original inner ears. This eliminates vertigo and motion sickness and allows conscious sound filtering. The integration window requires removing original inner ear architecture before the replacement is fully integrated, which means a period of no vestibular function at all in a body undergoing concurrent modifications on multiple fronts. Death 24. Lyman's ear rejection leaving you without vestibular function during ongoing implantation. Death 25. Surgical failure during original inner ear removal before implant integration completes.
The Susan membrane is implanted above the brain and gradually merges with it entirely. It enables suspended animation, arrested biological function that allows survival of otherwise fatal wounds for periods extending to centuries. The longest documented case involved Brother Silas of the Dark Angels, revived after 567 years. The Susan membrane requires chemical therapy and training to use consciously. Without that training, it triggers automatically in response to extreme trauma. An aspirant severely enough injured during training enters a state that the chapter may be unable to reverse. Death 26. Susan membrane triggering automatic suspension during training injuries with failed revival. Death 27. Membrane rejection causing neural disruption as it attempts to merge with existing brain tissue.
The melanchromic organ controls melanin production and provides radiation protection. Mutations in this organ produce some of the most recognizable physical traits in the lore. The salamander's jet-black skin and burning eyes from Nocturne's radiation. The raven guard's progressive whitening toward albinism. Those are mutations. A rejection is different. Death 28. Melanchromic organ rejection causing systemic melanin disruption, interfering with other organ regulatory chemistry. Death 29. Radiation sensitivity reversal. Failed organ increasing vulnerability to the same environmental conditions it was designed to mitigate. The oolitic kidney functions in conjunction with the secondary heart to perform emergency blood filtration, cycling your entire circulatory volume at high speed when toxins are detected, neutralizing nearly any blood-borne compound. Canonical sources confirm the trade-off. This process usually renders the Marine unconscious while it runs. An oolitic kidney that misfires during training, triggered by compounds it misidentifies as threats, produces incapacitation in environments not designed for incapacitated aspirants. Death 30. Oolitic kidney misfiring during training, causing incapacitation. Death 31. Oolitic kidney failure leaving the bloodstream unprotected as subsequent implants introduce new biochemical compounds. The neuroglottis is implanted at the back of the mouth. It enhances taste sensitivity to the degree that you can identify chemical compositions and track targets by tasting air. Integration involves placing material in an anatomically complex region while your nervous system is already carrying signals from 14 prior implants. Sensory cross-wiring during integration means taste receptor signals reaching pain centers rather than analytical processing. Death 32. Neuroglottis integration failure causing sensory cross-wiring producing continuous, uninterpretable pain.
Death 33. Neuroglottis rejection creating misfiring that propagates through an already modified sensory nervous system. The mucranoid is implanted at the base of the lower intestine. It secretes an oily compound through pores that protects against extreme temperatures and provides partial vacuum protection, activated by external chemical therapy rather than automatically. The failure mode is specific, secretion blocking pores rather than coating them, or, in training scenarios that involve early activation, failing to seal under the conditions it was implanted to address. Death 34. Mucranoid failure producing false confidence in vacuum survival capacity during training exercises conducted before full integration. The Becher's glands are two identical glands implanted in the lower lip alongside the salivary glands, or in the hard palate. Placement varies by chapter and apothecary. They secrete corrosive acid. A functioning Becher's gland allows a space marine to dissolve metal restraints given sufficient time.
An integrating Becher's gland that rejects before proper containment is established begins that secretion in the tissue surrounding its implantation site. Death 35. Becher's gland rejection with acid secretion beginning before containment integration completes. Death 36. Gland implantation site failure. Self-corrosion of surrounding facial and oral tissue. Before the last implant, the progenoid glands, 2 of them, throat and chest, maturing in 5 and 10 years respectively. They replicate the chapter's gene seed for future aspirants. This is the only form of continuity available to the Adeptus Astartes, who are infertile by design. Every chapter's survival across centuries depends on the progenoid glands of its current Marines. The apothecary harvests them from the dead. This is a primary duty, recorded in canonical sources, treated with the same seriousness as combat. If progenoid glands reject or mature incorrectly, the chapter receives nothing from that aspirant's years of transformation. If they mature with mutations embedded, the chapter receives something worse, instability propagating forward through the gene seed line. Death 37. Progenoid rejection severing the aspirant's genetic contribution to the chapter's future. Death 38. Corrupted progenoid maturation carrying mutation forward through the gene seed lineage. The black carapace is phase 19, and it's the last. Canonical sources describe it as neuroreactive, organic, fibrous material, black, implanted directly under the skin of your torso. After a few hours, it hardens. Synthetic fiber bundles grow inward, interlinking with your central nervous system. Interface ports are cut through it later.
Those ports allow your nervous system to connect directly to power armor's internal systems, making the suit an extension of your own body rather than a machine you pilot. The Sisters of Battle wear power armor. Inquisitors wear power armor. Without a black carapace, the armor moves when commanded. With one, the armor moves when you think. The prototype design came from the Terran geneticist Ammar Astarte and was perfected by Ezekiel Sedaine. Sedaine's mind was later digitally preserved within the Archmagos Call's systems during the Horus Heresy, which is why the records of the Black Carapace's creation are unusually complete. The most precisely engineered of the 19 implants is installed last because the nervous system must be sufficiently modified to accept neural integration of this depth. If the black carapace rejects, the synthetic fiber bundles are already growing. Neuroreactive material in active rejection sends signals through a nervous system that has been modified by 18 prior implants across several years. The propagation of that rejection isn't confined to the implant site. Death 39. Black carapace rejection causing neurological cascade through a fully modified nervous system. Death 40. Synthetic fiber bundle misfiring. Phantom neural pain without identifiable source. Continuous. Unresolvable. Death 41. Partial black carapace integration, producing sensory feedback from an armor interface that isn't yet installed. The feeling of plates against your skin. Weight you aren't carrying. Enclosure in a suit that doesn't exist. That last one, in the candidates who survive it, isn't a malfunction. A neophyte who feels armor that isn't there yet has successfully integrated the black carapace. The interface is coming online. It's working exactly as designed. For the others, the catalog above describes where they went. You are a scout now. The apothecary releases you to the 10th Company. You aren't yet a full Space Marine. You can't interface with power armor. The black carapace requires time to fully mature, and the ports haven't been cut. What you have is scout armor, lighter than plate, nearly silent in operation, designed for people who need to not be seen. What you have is a sergeant. Sergeant Torias Tellian of the Ultramarines 10th Company put the operational role in terms that are now canonical. Forget all your preconceptions of war, of battle lines clashing in the churned ground. Your mission is to attack before the foe even realizes that the war has begun. To strike hard at those vital weaknesses that all armies possess, but that no commander will admit to. Scout missions are infiltration, reconnaissance, sabotage behind enemy lines before the main advance.
You operate without the armor your gene seed was designed to interface with, in conditions that fully armored battle brothers would find challenging, with a squad of other neophytes in various stages of biological completion. There is a boy you trained with. He went through the implantation sequence ahead of you, same intake, different surgical schedule. He received his black carapace while you were still integrating Phase 17. He passed every benchmark before you did, was selected for early 10th Company deployment, was assigned to a forward reconnaissance mission on a world you were told the details of only afterward. He died on that mission. 6 weeks after becoming a scout, the Lexicanum's entry on Scout Marines confirms that not all recruits survive their training, for no quarter can be asked or given when forging humanity's finest warriors. The Codex-confirmed role of Scout Marines places them in active combat from their first assignment.
They fight alongside battle companies during desperate moments. They conduct forward operations against targets specifically chosen because the presence of Space Marines, any Space Marines, armored or not, provides tactical value that outweighs the risk. Death 42. Early scout deployment casualties before all implant integration has stabilized. Death 43. Forward reconnaissance assignments without power armor against threats assessed for fully armored Marines. Death 44. Infiltration and sabotage operations behind enemy lines with no recovery option. Death 45. Combat during what the Codex frames as continued training. Death 46. The training exercise that isn't an exercise. Death 47. The mission designated as straightforward that wasn't. You survive all of it. Somewhere between 16 and 18 years old, you stand in the armory and accept your power armor for the first time. You feel it before the seals close. The black carapace interface transmitting through ports cut into your torso. The armor's systems registering as extensions of your own body, rather than as machinery surrounding it. You are 6.5 feet tall at the minimum, closer to 7. You weigh somewhere between 300 and 350 kilograms. You have 2 hearts, 3 lungs, a secondary filtration kidney, glands in your face that produce acid, an organ woven into your spinal cord that can extract memories from flesh, a membrane merged with your brain that can stop your biological clock indefinitely, a layer of neuroreactive film under your skin that is currently telling you that your armor is part of you. You need 4 hours of sleep. You could go 2 weeks without any. You can hear a heartbeat at a kilometer. You can identify toxins by taste.
You can survive conditions that would kill a guard regiment before the commanding officer finished his first situational assessment. You have also watched at conservative count based on the intake records between 97 and 99 of every 100 boys who began this process with you die before reaching this point. Their names aren't in the regimental rolls. They aren't commemorated at the Feast of Days. They are the funnel. The process requires them, requires the dying because the implants aren't calibrated to succeed. They are calibrated to find the bodies that can survive succeeding.
There is no other method. There is no shortcut. The chapter processes the intake and receives what the intake produces. The Ultramarines' own historical accounts record an intake of 300 aspirants that produced one surviving battle brother. That isn't the upper limit of attrition.
It's an illustrative point on a curve that runs the same direction in every canonical example. Most don't survive. 47 distinct failure modes documented above. One of the boys you trained with encountered death 47. 2 of them encountered death 39. You carry all of them in omophagia perfect clarity. Not through any ritual eating, but because you were there, and because a Space Marine's memory does not selectively forget. The chapter calls this the creation of a Space Marine. Now the smash cut. You are decades past 11. The scars from Becher's gland integration resolved long ago under Laraman cells that work exactly as they should. Your black carapace sits below the skin of your torso like a second nervous system, permanently online. Your power armor is being maintained by a serf in the armory behind you. You are standing at the edge of a landing zone on a world that isn't the world you came from.
Ahead of you, in a loose group, approximately 40 children. The oldest is 14. The apothecary has run tissue compatibility screening and flagged the viable candidates. You have read those assessments. You are looking at the children. You have already done the math. Fewer than 1 in 100 who reach this point will survive what follows. These 40 have been pre-filtered from a much larger pool. The funnel still applies. The implant sequence waits for all 40 of them equally. And the implant sequence does not make accommodations for the ones who meet your eyes without looking away. One of them is doing that right now. A child at the edge of the group, 11 years old, watching you with the specific quality of attention that the tissue screening flagged as statistically promising. That isn't a coincidence. That quality of attention, the refusal to look away, the aggressive stillness, is precisely what the screening is looking for.
You have already decided which 3 of these 40 have the strongest odds. The apothecary is waiting. You give the signal. You remember with complete fidelity being 11 years old in a different underhive, watching a shuttle land, feeling the specific sensation of being chosen before you understood what being chosen meant. You know exactly what comes next, for all 40 of them. You know it the way you know the weight of your armor and the sound of your own secondary heart, as something that is simply true, recorded in the permanent architecture of what you are. The horror isn't that you don't care about what's going to happen to most of them. The horror is that you do, completely and without qualification, and you select them anyway. Because you know what waits on the other side of the funnel for the 3 who survive. Because the chapter can't exist without them.
Because you are proof that the process produces something worth the cost. And the cost is the only way to produce it. The child at the edge steps forward. You nod. Subscribe for more stories like this.